Dr David Kilcullen is a former Australian soldier who's a world-renowned expert in counterinsurgency. He's been advising the US State Department about the war in Afghanistan, and he joins us now from Washington. David Kilcullen, good morning to you.
Hi, thank you for having me.
We had Barack Obama and Julia Gillard and most other world leaders at Chicago all singing from the same song sheet. They were saying this transition from NATO to Afghan control was going smoothly. Based on your assessment, is it?
I think it's been patchy, but I do think that one of the key points that all the leaders made in Chicago was that the transition is a process. So a lot of people have been saying, well, why are we transitioning early in the middle of 2013 when we've been talking about the end of 2014 for a number of years? And I think the answer to that is that they've recognized that this is a process that is actually going to take a long time. So they're essentially putting a marker in the sand to say we're going to start this process of transition to full Afghan security lead in the middle of 2013 with the aim of getting it done by 2014. So I think you can see that as people recognizing, as President Obama said, you know, this is going to be a patchy process and possibly messy, and we need to give ourselves enough time to get it right.
Working towards that mid-2013 timetable, based on your assessment at the moment, are Afghan security chiefs, will they be in a position to take full control of the security infrastructure in that country?
So, as I said, the plan is for them to begin taking control in the middle of 2013 with the objective of finishing that process by the end of 2014. Based on what we're seeing now, we've certainly seen a lot of very significant improvement on the part of particularly the Afghan police in the last year or two. However, off a very low base. They were in a pretty parlous state until about 2 years ago. They're much better now, but the question is, will they be good enough by the end of 2014 to actually take the fight to the Taliban in a law and order sense in the villages? In terms of the army, the issues are slightly different. They have to do with ethnic makeup and the representation of different types of capabilities in the forward deployed Afghan combat units. But I think there too we've seen a lot of progress. Again, the question is, can they actually handle the threat that's going to be there by the end of 2014? Nobody knows the answer to that. The plan right now, of course, is to retain a substantial number of NATO advisors past the end of 2014 to assist the Afghans, and also to provide a lot of financial assistance and other assistance. Between now and then, what ISAF is trying to do is to do as much damage to the Taliban as possible so that the enemy that the Afghans confront after the end of 2014 is somewhat reduced in capability. But as I said, we don't know how it's going to go yet. It's a long time between now and the end of 2014, and we'll have to see how things progress closer to the date, I think.
As you know, we've seen the Taliban focusing on high-profile and propaganda-driven attacks of late. Do you get the sense, David Kilcullen, that they're, in the large part, simply counting down the clock, preparing for potentially a major offensive against those Afghan troops from January the 1st, 2015?
There's certainly an element of that. What we've seen is certainly much less activity in the countryside by Taliban guerrilla units and more of a focus on urban targeting, and this has been around for about 2 years now. The focus really began to shift in early 2010, but we've recently seen a series of pretty high-profile attacks in Kandahar, in Herat, and of course most recently in Kabul, with a fairly sustained siege of a number of locations around the city a few weeks ago. So we're certainly seeing this shift to more kind of propaganda-focused, urban, trying to send the message to the Afghan population, hey, we're still in the game, don't forget us. That said, I do think it's becoming increasingly difficult for the Taliban to operate in the way they've been used to. So they're going to inevitably weaken a little bit by 2014. It's a question of whether they can use their sanctuary in Pakistan to sustain themselves to the point where they're able to bounce back after 2014. And
you mentioned Pakistan. How important is it that Pakistan also sings from the same song sheet? We have this row over those still closed supply routes into Afghanistan. Just how important a role will Pakistan play in this transition to Afghan security forces?
Well, right now the Pakistanis are kind of not really playing much of a role, or certainly not much of a helpful role at all. And in fact, generally the Chicago summit wasn't much of a surprise. We saw the administration outlining its goals for the drawdown, which was expected. We also saw the administration trying to get donors to commit money to help fund the Afghan security forces after 2014. Australia, Germany and Britain were the only countries going into the summit that had already committed. But over the last day, we've seen a lot of countries now commit funding to post-2014, so that we're up to basically the amount of money that was calculated as being necessary. But the people that have really failed to be part of the summit were the Pakistanis. The Pakistani representative, Zardari, came basically demanding an apology for an attack last November that killed a number of Pakistanis on the Afpak border. He didn't get that apology, and as a consequence, basically the Pakistanis have said they will not open the supply route to the east, which allows traffic in and out from Afghanistan through Pakistan. That's been closed since last November, and not only have the Pakistanis put up the price by a very large amount in terms of each truck that NATO would be allowed to send through that network, they're demanding this kind of apology for the events last November before they'll even consider it. The fact is NATO has other options. There's a northern distribution network that runs through Russia and the Central Asian republics, and they don't need Pakistan to quite the extent that the Pakistanis seem to assume. Where I think the Pakistanis still have an important role is in their role as a sanctuary for the Taliban operating in Afghanistan. And unless we see a shift in that between now and 2014, I think it's quite likely that there'll still be a fairly robust Taliban organisation out there at the end of this NATO transition. And of course that will pose significant problems for the Afghans.
And just finally, David Kilcullen, looking at that post-2014 landscape in Afghanistan, given Australia's size and our contribution to the war so far, of course we know the bulk of those 1,500-odd Australian troops will be getting out by 2014, but what sort of military presence, obviously special forces focused, do you see Australia maintaining in Afghanistan from 2015?
Well, that's a decision that hasn't been fully fleshed out yet. But I think generally speaking, the types of assets that countries will leave behind after the end of 2014 will be trainers, civilian advisors, various kinds of development and governance professionals, and then special forces with a counter-terrorism role. But not all countries have agreed to that. So some countries, for example, the Canadians, put in a lot of money today to the future effort, but have resolutely refused to consider or reconsider their decision to pull their trainers out after 2014. And that's one of these issues which I think will play out again in a series of conferences later this year. There's a conference in July in Tokyo for donors, and more will be discussed about the civilian aspects of it then. The counter-terrorism piece, I think, is to some extent still a work in progress as we see how the war develops between now and the middle of next year.
Okay, David Kilcullen, we'll see how it plays out. Thank you very much for your insights this morning.
Thanks, Mike.